Good evening. It's Monday night, so it is Mental Health Mondays with Chuck Bastie, and he has got an extra special guest. I'm really excited about listening to this story. It's an incredible story, but more importantly, the change and what this gentleman's doing with the world is absolutely spectacular. Chuck.
Yeah, I first met Elladj Balde on the set of Battle of the Blades last year, not this season, but last year. He was a choreographer last year, and this year he was a judge on Battle of the Blades. And just everything about him just exudes light and energy. And, I was just drawn to him from the first time I saw him. We talked backstage, and I'm just more than overjoyed to have him on the show tonight.
Well, listen, I just want to say before we bring Elladj up and I go down, and I'm the producer for tonight, so I'll make sure everything runs smoothly as it usually does. I just want to show you this picture again.
Yeah, and honestly, when he's on that ice, he uses every square inch. His edge work is impeccable. He has the trademark backflip. I mean, if you follow him on Instagram at Elladj Balde, you will see just some of the most beautiful footage he has on lakes in Alberta skating. And yeah, I'm overjoyed to have him on the show.
I actually saw one of those, but the reason why I showed you that picture, I just wanted everybody to realize, as a kid growing up, being a hockey player in the day I was, there was always this disconnect between figure skaters and hockey players. And my mother, she was a speed skater. So she taught me how to speed skate. And then she said, Kerry, I think I was 14, it's time for you to take figure skating lessons. And, at that time, guys, yeah, come on, figure. And it was the best thing I ever did. I'm not going to claim that I could do what Elladj does there, but they taught me that. They taught me to jump, to move, my edges, and I would highly, highly recommend anybody that's wanted to become a proficient skater. I know there's power skating, but there's nothing like that edge work. And I really say my skating style improved tenfold once I did that. So let's listen to this great story. Thanks for bringing this on, Chuck. It's always an honor to have you on, and of course, it's connected a mental health initiative, and bringing great people on like Elladj is going to make a huge difference to so many. So thank you.
Thanks, Harry. And let's bring up our guest, Elladj Balde. He is a former professional figure skater. There's the man, the myth, the legend, right there. Elladj, thanks for being on the show tonight.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to get into the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about inclusivity and diversity. And you and I had spoke about this last week or so. And what I wanted to really set the conversation up for is how we can be better allies, for marginalized people. There is a real epidemic of, awareness that's breaking out right now of people who are seeing the injustice of people, whether they be in the LGBTQ community, whether they be inside of racial profiling or religious profiling or gender profiling. I have a saying that we're all souls and we're all having a human experience. My suit looks a little different from your suit. Your suit looks a little different from everybody else, but souls don't have gender. Souls don't have religion. Those are human constructs. And I think when we can relate to each other, not as the clown suit that we're wearing, but the souls that are inhabiting the leased car that we're driving, I think we can have a completely different conversation about how we can be much more inclusive of people and much more accepting.
Yeah, I think you've hit a really important point. And one of the things that I have noticed and have experienced since this rise in consciousness and rise in awareness of the experience of Black people in America and Canada, and the experience of Indigenous people and people of color, is that, for the first time in what feels like in my lifetime, and I'm sure in history as well, is that people are listening, and the experience of a Black person in America is being acknowledged. And I think that is probably the biggest shift that has happened, and why we are able to even have this conversation live in front of an audience. I think without it, there wouldn't be, there wouldn't be conversation. And before that, everything was, anytime there was every time the topic was discussed, there was always people were always trying to silence a lot of people and trying to discredit their experience. And I think one of the biggest changes right now that I'm seeing is people are listening. I think when you're asking, how to, one of the ways that you can be a good ally is listening and acknowledging, and not just hearing and trying to respond, but actually listening to people's experience and actually trying to put yourself in some people's shoes. Because, racism face to face is one thing. And I think that will, I don't know when that will change, and that has existed forever. But one of the things that people don't see and don't understand is the concept of systemic racism, and how a system can be built to oppress a certain type of person, a certain race. And I think that is the conversation that people need to have. And that is where people need to listen, because if you are not a person of color, you did not experience systemic racism. And that is, that is where I think finally people's consciousness has been shifted, is that people are understanding that there is an issue in the system. And when we talk about the system, we're talking about in society, but also in sports. And having the conversation within sports is huge, because sports is a microcosm of society. And so, if the issue exists in society, it will exist in sports. And if the issue exists in sports, it will exist in society as well. So I think the important thing here is to understand that, and really, take the steps necessary to try and change that within your own environment.
You just taken away all my thunder right now, because everything I was just going to say thank you for taking out my entire. I'm just going to scratch all my notes right now, because you just covered it all. No, I'm joking as well. But I mean, before we get to the point, I mean, you brought up a great point. I would have used the word invalidate the person's human experience, because I think marginalized people get their experience is just, it's not even devalued. There's just no empathy, I think, from the white privilege that I carry to understand what your journey has been like with systemic racism. And before we even get to that, I want to give people a chance to get to know you a little better, to understand your story, because that's exactly what we need to do in listening. Before I can understand, where you've been, I need to know where you've been. And obviously you've got an incredibly unique story, because you come from a biracial background. Your mother was Ukrainian and your father was from West Africa as well. And you grew up in...
My mom was Russian.
Russian, I apologize.
Yeah. No,
I know you were born in Moscow?
Yeah, Moscow. Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, that's a very, very, obviously, with the history of Russia, there's obviously a massive systemic racism problem in Russia, even to this day. Obviously, there's a massive caste system that goes in the hierarchy of white Russians to from Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan, all the stands that are there. Obviously, the difference between the dynamics of the two, very much real, still going on there today. Your family emigrated to Montreal here, and then you grew up being educated in Canada, correct?
Yeah. That's it's pretty much a good description. So yeah, my father, who's from Guinea, West Africa, he grew up in a small village where they don't have electricity, don't have running water. It's very, you live with nature. You have chicken, cows, goats. You live in nature, and that's kind of where my father grew up. And obviously his dream was to further his education in a developed country like the Soviet Union at the time, which was extremely powerful. So my father was able to go to Russia and do his studies there. That's where he met my mom. They lived in Uzbekistan actually for a very long time, which was Soviet Union at the time. My older sister was born there, but then at the age of 6, she was diagnosed with leukemia. And that's when we kind of went to Moscow, and I was born in Moscow during that period of time. And then after I was born, we flew to Germany. We lived in Germany for a little bit for my sister so that she could get treatments, the right treatments for her leukemia. And then unfortunately, my sister did pass away in Germany, and then that's when we immigrated to Canada, because at that point, the Soviet Union had crashed in 1990. It was 1992, so Russia was in a really, really bad situation, and my parents didn't want to go back, especially my father, because of the racism he experienced there, like the actual physical racism, which is a different thing, the systemic racism. Obviously, he experienced the systemic one, but having to almost fight for your life on a daily basis when you're in a country is not a pleasant thing to experience. And they didn't want to stay in Germany, so that's when we had the opportunity to come to Canada. I grew up in Montreal most of my life. I did live in the States for about 4 years in Detroit. And then moved back to Montreal and spent most of my life there. And I started skating at the age of 6. My mom, obviously Russia, figure skating is huge. Hockey and figure skating are massive sports in Russia. So she's always been very passionate about the sport. And so she introduced me to the sport at the age of 6. And I remember my first few times skating outside with my mom being really fun. And I was very comfortable very fast. I was able to move, I was pretty agile, pretty quick on the ice, which was great. And my mom saw that, and that's when she kind of decided to right away put me in private lessons. So basically, I started at the age of 6, and by 6.5, I was already competing, which is crazy because at that time I didn't really know how to skate. So the sport got serious very fast. And I want to say, just to kind of set up my whole story and set up, kind of the things that I went through, in the Russian culture, when you're doing figure skating or you're doing a sport, you're doing it to be the best. You're doing it to be Olympic champion, and that's the goal. And if that's not your goal, then you're wasting your time, and you shouldn't participate in the sport. So that's kind of right away, that was kind of like the conditioning that was downloaded in my brain. And so, that being the case, and with the sport becoming so serious so quickly, I kind of pushed back a little bit when I was young, because I didn't like the intensity of it. And also it was very, I was falling a lot because I was trying to learn new jumps. I was always cold. So I actually didn't enjoy skating for the first 4 years, potentially, of something like that. For the first 4 years of my career, I didn't like skating and didn't want to skate and did everything not to skate. I went all the way to hide my skates in my closet and tell my mom that I lost my skates and I couldn't go skating, right? Like I tried everything. I literally tried everything in my power not to go skate. But obviously my mom persisted, and she would look through my stuff, find my skates, and then, here we are 24 years later, and I'm super passionate about the sport. And I love the art and the sport of figure skating. I don't know necessarily competitive side of the sport, but the actual the craft of figure skating, I'm extremely passionate about, and I love it. So that's kind of how my figure skating career started.
Wow, and there's a picture of you just on the Battle of the Blades. Obviously, you're a choreographer as well. That's where I met you, not this year, but last year. And then you just graduated, obviously, to be a judge on this year's panel during the COVID presentation of Battle of the Blades. I want to go back to community, because obviously you get your start and your confidence to allow you to express everything that you're dealing with internally. I used hockey, obviously, and my dad was in the military, so I was just really good at being angry. I was world class at that.
Right.
And I get to be a goalie, so even better. I get to blame everybody for letting the puck in when it went past me as well. And that's what I was dealing with as a young kid as well. So let's talk about your experiences growing up as well. Obviously you've got a lot to unpack there coming over from Russia, loss of your sister as well, starting brand new in a new country that you have to learn the language for. We didn't even cover the fact that you didn't speak English before you came over to Canada. Did you speak English first?
No, my family didn't speak. We spoke Russian. My dad is from a French country. He's French colonized country. So he speaks French. So I didn't have any issues learning French, and that's why we moved to Montreal, because it would be a lot easier for my father to get a job, because he actually spoke French. But my mom only spoke Russian, so she had to learn French and English, and my dad had to learn English as well. So for me, Russian and French were always part of my household. English is the one I had to learn, and I want to say till the age of 12, 13, I didn't really speak any English, really.
Wow.
So I had to work on it, because English is a third language, and you'll hear sometimes that,
I don't hear an accent from you at all.
But the words, sometimes the vocabulary is a little, I sometimes have to think 3 times before saying a word.
So let's talk about like your ability to start skating, building small wins as a young kid, obviously becoming a competitive figure skater inside the skating community as well, very cliquey, and obviously very elite. Obviously like Carrie had talked about on the top of the show, whenever I was playing hockey, if you were taking figure skating lessons, we called you gay. That's obviously not something that we would talk about and say today, but that's just what we did back then. And it's not something that we're proud of at all. And that's exactly the reason why we want to raise the awareness for, what we said and what we did were wrong. There's a saying, if a man at 50 thinks the same way that he did at 20, he's wasted 30 years of his life. And so that evolution is just paramount to actually see in the rearview mirror, what we've actually said, what we've done, that just isn't applicable to these days as well. But take me back to when you first started to build those small wins, build your community, and be able to feel included inside of that community.
Yeah, so I want to say that for a big part of my career, one of the things that was that affected me and that had an impact on how I viewed myself and how I operated in the space. One of them was lack of representation. So not actually seeing someone that looked like me that was successful in the sport. And I never truly understood the impact of that until this year, to be honest, until I actually sat down and tried to and look back on my life. And after the murder of George Floyd, this rise in self-reflection as a white person, as a Black person, as a human being, I think everyone should have gone through a moment of self-reflecting and trying to figure out, how does racism show up in my life? Where does it lay, and how have I operated in that space potentially? And for me, one of the things that I had to look back on is my career, and where does racism play in figure skating? Because again, it's like when you're in a judge sport, everything you do is being scrutinized and people are watching. And so you have to be a certain way, you have to act a certain way, you have to show up a certain way. And in figure skating community, it's very white, European, elitist, like you said, kind of environment. And so when you don't match that, what you learn to do is you learn how to code switch, you learn how to adapt in order to match that. And one of the things that I went through as a young figure skater is seeing the people that were successful, looking at the people that were successful in the sport, and trying to mimic their appearance and how they skated. And all of that happened unconsciously. I was taking those actions, and I changed the way that I dressed. I changed what type of music I listened to. I changed literally the way that I walked. I changed the way that I talked. I changed what type of music I was skating to, costumes that I was wearing. So everything that I did, I had a moment where I shifted that completely in order to match what a successful skater looked like, which in Canada was a white Canadian preppy kind of boy, right? So that's something that for many years didn't feel uh, didn't feel authentic. It didn't feel like I was comfortable in my own skin, because prior to that, I was very much loving hip hop, rap, R&B, basketball, all these things that I truly connected with. Honestly, all the things that I saw people that looked like me that were successful, I was extremely, extremely attracted to that. And I wanted to be that, right? But there was nowhere in figure skating where I could see that. And so I had to switch that completely. And then when you show up on practice and some from Skate Canada or the Quebec team or coach tells you, you need to cut your hair because I was growing an afro. You need to cut your hair because it's not clean. It looks nappy, right? Or you can't be wearing this because again, it's not proper or it's not clean. So what it was is like all the things that were black about me were people were trying to suppress that or remove that because I also had the white side in me, right? And people always related to that. When I was a good skater, people would tell me, "Oh, you're a good skater because you're Russian." Or people would, I would hang out with some friends and they would tell me, "Oh, you know, you're cool. You're chill. You're not like the other black people. You're chill. You're basically, we acknowledge the
You
white
don't
in
act like a
you."
black
And
guy. Yeah. Like you don't act like a
exactly.
black guy.
You don't,
Yeah,
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 you don't act like a black guy. You speak properly, you
yeah.
show up in a certain way. And so, so we're cool with that. We feel comfortable. We don't feel threatened, right?
I
So
don't even think most white people even know how offensive that statement is. Like you'd
it's a,
say, "Oh, you don't act like a black guy," and that to me, as a white person growing up, I'm giving you a compliment. As backhanded as that lands now, and I understand that. I had to have wonderful friends, people of color, walk me through this.
yeah,
Because I wasn't taught that. I
yeah,
wasn't understanding of that. I never grew up with anybody else who wasn't white on an army base.
yeah,
And if we had a minority, they were from Quebec playing on the
yeah,
hockey team, on the base hockey team. And that's who we made fun of
yeah,
was the French guys as opposed to, people of color. And that lack of empathy doesn't even register as what I don't know because I just don't know that I don't know that at
yeah,
that time. So when you say, do you have any understanding how offensive that could be to me? My first reaction would be like, what do you mean? I don't know. I was saying to you, you're cool. That's how I was
mm-hmm.
saying. And that's how systemic this runs, that the disconnect between me and you, of me acknowledging who your identity is, saying, I don't see color. It's like, well, now you're just invalidating my entire identity. Like
Yeah,
you're saying right now that you're not seeing. And what I actually say, what I mean to say is, I'm acknowledging your soul.
yeah,
And yet what comes out is just so ass backwards wrong of
yeah,
invalidating your human experience. And I think that's
of
the
course.
conversation starter right there. I
Yeah,
don't think most white people understand that.
yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. And I think, you know, being in that space, even for me at the time, it's like you laugh it off. You don't really understand what it means. And society has done such a good job at making people become blind to what racism is and how that might affect other people. And so, my whole life, for example, I had to learn how to express myself in a non-angry way, even though I was really in pain or I was mad or I was frustrated. Because as soon as a black person, you show up angry, you're just an angry black person, right? So, all of this is like, if no one tells you that, right? But that's what society, that's how the picture is painted. And and that is embedded in the system. That you know, there's so many layers to systemic racism that you can't even you can't even see it sometimes, how it's affecting people. And so you know, going back to the beginning, you know, the most important thing is to not only listen and try to understand, but also educate yourself. Educating ourselves on, even I had to educate myself too. I don't have all the answers. I don't know how to fix the system. You know, my whole, you know, through, since all of this happened, I have people calling me like, how do we fix the system? Like, what do you think we need to do? I didn't create the system. I don't know. I'm as clueless as you in those ways. I know my experience. I can share with you my experience and what I went through. I can tell you what I think, you know, should change in my life and in my environment. But you know, we don't all have answers to how to fix this issue. And I think that's why everybody needs to be on the same page. Everybody needs to educate themselves so that together we can understand, you know, what decisions need to be made in order for something to change, right? So you know, that's the space that I'm in, and that's why within figure skating, you know, we've decided to start the conversation of how to be an anti-racist. We decided to start the conversation on systemic racism because that's, if we can create a change within our little bubble, within our little environment, then that's going to also expand and trickle outside of the sport as well, because sport and society are the same. They're the same thing. And yeah, and this is, you know, this is it's an important picture. And that's the thing, is like, you know, these two boxes that are there, you know, if you think about, you know, if you think about race, we need to get to a point where we don't see race as inferior, and so we have to give more. You know what I mean? I think what as this is developing, as this is changing, we need to truly understand that as human beings, you know, we are all human beings. We are all living this human experience. And so there's, you know, there shouldn't be, you know, one race that at some point gets more than another. But right now, the way it is right now, clearly, you know, there is specific races that are getting much more opportunities than others. So that balance needs to shift so that at some point it'll be an equal playing field, right? But we're far, 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 far from that.
You bring up a great point as well, and we're just going to go to a couple of pictures here of you skating in Alberta as well. And I gotta say, you mentioned the word authentic earlier on when you're talking about you learning your trade as a figure skater and being expressive, and you identify with hip hop and R&B and basketball. And if you look at you skate now, the word authentic is the one word that comes to my mind. Because not only, I mean, I'm just going to throw sunshine up your ass, but your edge work is impeccable. I mean, like if there's one thing I could say about you, it's edge work. It's just masterful edge work, and the backflip as well. Like obviously, it's what you notice, this massive backflip that you do. That's truly, it's amazing. I don't know how you do that. Obviously, it's something you picked up, but your creative flow, your joie de vivre, in how you're expressing you coming out through skates is just, if you can take something as just physical as skates, and then put whatever you need to put into as far as mastery, the 10,000 hours of being a masterful skater, that's a gift in itself. And then you can take one level higher, and you can take the creativity, the genius, the expression, the feeling, you know, channeling emotions, and then translating that through music and carrying yourself as an extension of that storytelling, which is what the beauty of figure skater really is. And you carry all of that in every single skate I've seen you done. And I know that in order to do that, you must have had to do a ton of work before that emotionally. You mentioned the word angry, and I'm going to segue with this one because I think this is where we need to go. When I was angry, you know, on the ice, I'm just a crazy goalie. You know, my race never comes into it. You know, nobody says an angry white guy. I said nobody ever. Angry, crazy goalie, sure, I got that all the time. You know, stubby sawed-off guy, Napoleon disease, sure, I got all that, right? But at no point was it ever about my identity as my race or my manhood or my pride as a human being and what I look like. And I think for us to have a look at what that does, you know, that triggers us as anger, is you're basically invalidating my entire human experience based on what I look like, which this is the way I explain it, is if you and I were at a Halloween party, it's October 31st, and you're wearing your suit and your costume and I'm wearing mine. And the next day, we're able to take our suits off and not be related to as the costume that we were wearing the night before. You know, you can't take your costume off the next day because you're still the identity of what systemic racism wants to project on you. And unless you're a better person in controlling your emotions, channeling your feelings, you know, being able to understand that you're going to have a harder life walking through than a person who's white, for example, who doesn't look like you figure skating in the figure skating world, you're going to have to learn a different set of tools to be listened to. Because if I'm angry, sure, when people are angry, you have less listening for them. You know, that's just generally speaking across the board. Nobody likes to get yelled at. But if you're angry and you're a person of color, now you're just an angry black person. And that's just too knee-jerk to go to as well. So what did you have to do? Because, you know, you're not like that. You know, you don't have that anger energy. You've chosen to change your views in life to be more compassionate, more empathetic, to be more understanding, and to have that mindfulness of how you carry yourself. What was the shift for you?
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out is that, you know, there are a lot of people that experienced things that are so much worse than I can even imagine. And so, you know, when people say you should approach it a certain way, you know, you shouldn't be angry or you should find compassion. I was able to find it because of some of the things that I went through, but also the trauma that I have is you know, might not be the same as someone else's. And when someone experiences a deep level of trauma and doesn't get to heal that, that will come out as anger. And I think people sometimes don't take time to understand the level of anger that is in someone's experience. And because then they compare to another person that had similar experiences, but that doesn't come with anger. And I think, you know, I think both need to be acknowledged and both need to be accepted. And I think, you know, both are right, because at the end of the day, you know, someone trying to create change in this world, if it comes out as angry, the intention is still the same. The energy is different, but the intention is the same. And not everyone has had the opportunity to heal, to heal certain experiences. So I just want to make that clear, because I'm able to come from a space of compassion and understanding, but again, because of the work that I've done and because of some type of experience that I've had in my life. And and I think in order for me to get into this space, I had to go through a massive shift in my life. And one of the a few of the factors that led me to this was, one, having my entire self-worth being based in something that is not real. And what I mean by that is having your entire self-worth being based on an idea of who you think you are. And that idea of who you think you are, it being based on factors that you can't control, right? So, and on factors that are actually external factors, right? So that whole concept of identifying with something that is that is not coming from within, that is that is an area of suffering. Another one is, again, like I said, the lack of representation and not necessarily knowing who you are as a human being, and what what do you identify with. That's another one. And then the third element is shame. For me, shame
Yeah.
was a huge one, because we all experience shame in certain ways, um, and for me, doing the sport that I was doing caused me brought a lot of experience where I felt ashamed of what I was doing. And I think those three experiences were, those three factors in my career were extremely important, because that's what led me to freeing myself of those things, right? I started recognizing that those are things that are actually causing suffering in my life, and I need to actually do something to change that. And that for me happened in 2015, when I was, you know, at the peak of my strength, and I was in shape. And that year I had envisioned myself to be national champion, to go to worlds, to make a certain, top 10, and then eventually that will lead me to my ultimate identification, which is Olympic champion, right? That was kind of the path that I was on, and that's what I believed that I was. That's what I believed who I was an Olympic champion, a national champion, and this champion in figure skating. And so in 2015, all of that kind of shattered, because that year I was supposed to win nationals, and obviously I didn't. And not only did I not win nationals, but I had the worst experience of, probably one of the worst competitions that I've ever had. So at that point, I had to question everything. I had to, because if I wasn't national champion, and then if I was a national champion, and potentially not, if I'm not going to be Olympic champion, who am I? Who am I? Why am I doing this? Why am I here? I had my entire identity was surrounding this idea of being an Olympic champion. So when I realized that that's potentially not my path, I went through a really massive shift, where I had to start thinking about who I was as a human being outside of that, and I didn't have an answer. And so that's when the shift started for me, and that's when I started realizing I had all these emotions that I'd never dealt with, that I'd never looked into, and that were inside of me, and that were causing me to act a certain way unconsciously, and not understanding why I was acting in a certain way, even though, all these actions were based in all of those experiences. I wasn't aware of any of that. And so, this opportunity to dive deep was huge. And I met, I met one of the most beautiful human beings that I've met in this lifetime, who guided me through this. Her name is Gail Mitchell, and I met her, and she really helped me understand, what is real in this human experience. And by finally opening my eyes to what is real in this human experience, I was able to heal. I was able to start my healing process.
Yeah.
And that was years ago. And that healing process has continued. And I've been in this space where, as things show up, I'm aware and conscious of what's showing up and why it's showing up. And if I'm not sure why it's showing up, I'm taking the time to try to understand why it's showing up. And that process is extremely important for anyone to live authentically, and to live from a space of truth. And the reason why I'm able to skate now from a place of truth, and the reason why I'm able to skate from a place of authenticity, and I'm able to share my authenticity with the world, is because I went through all of these experiences, and because I took the time to understand the depth of who I am in this, in this lifetime, in this human form.
I think it's amazing how you just articulated that, because it's kind of like how I hear that is like when you were able to heal that past trauma, you were able to shed layers of the onion to get yourself out of your own way. And then you become a completely different, uninhibited skater. You get to be free. You get to be expressed. You get to be authentic. And those are just powerful, powerful tropes that you can, live your life. Figure skating, sport aside, that would be a gift in itself just for that. But the real gift of that is that the sport brought that out of you as a human being. And I had it all asked backwards. I thought it was always about hockey, making it to the NHL, becoming an NHL hockey player. Every day was Game 7 of the Stanley Cup in my life. I missed the mark entirely. The sport was just there to give me the life skills that I needed to be a better human being, using the sport as my passion, as a lead to find mentors like you mentioned as well, to help you go dig deeper of like why you're angry, what you're processing, what your healing journey includes. And like you, I was absolutely, completely just oblivious to this. It was not something my father in the military ever talked about. He didn't talk about your feelings. He didn't talk about, if you did have feelings, they were anger. And anger was allowed because, that was considered to be constructive. Better to get the anger out than swallow it and swallow this poison.
Right.
As well.
Right. I connect with that. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. I connect with it because in a way, for me, anger, in skating, we're never allowed to show anger.
Never.
It's never, we never have an outlet to express anger. And, when you don't, when you make a mistake, you have to stand up with a smile as if nothing happened. When you're sitting there and judges give you, the score that you don't, that doesn't feel right, you can't show
shrug.
Anger. You have to
shrug at best.
Yeah, you have to smile and you have to present yourself in a certain way. So there's never an outlet for releasing anger. And I felt like, throughout years, it's like I accumulated this anger and I had never, I was never able to release it. And so I was actually releasing it in other ways in my life. It unconsciously, I realized that, some of the ways that I was acting as a teenager, some of the things that I did, I was trying to release some of that anger in different ways because in my sport and in my environment, I was never allowed to do that. Right. So I think, I think, anger is such a misunderstood emotion. I think, I think people don't understand. They think anger is not a good thing and you shouldn't feel anger. But at the end of the day, we're human beings. We're going to feel angry. It's an emotion. It's energy. It's in our bodies. We all, you can be a Buddhist monk and you'll still feel anger. Now, whether you react to it, that's a completely different thing. Whether
I look at anger is almost like a gift to me now, because anger actually shows up for me as there's an unhealed wound there that I have the ability to see, okay, I'm angry about this. This is my thought about that experience that just transpired, or I got triggered or activated or whatever you want to say. Okay, so what's the reason why I'm angry? Because there's an unhealed wound there. If I had amnesia and I didn't have a memory that got triggered for something that just happened in my past in the present moment, I wouldn't have taken that personally. I wouldn't have been offended by that. I wouldn't have gotten angry at that. But that's an old unhealed wound. And I'm human. I just catch it a lot faster now because I've trained myself to see when I'm angry. Okay, I'm angry. I understand them. Okay, what just happened? How did I take that personally? What did they say? What was my interpretation of that? And I can go through the work to process that. But that took years, and I mean absolute years, to go through that. Otherwise, I'm just going to dominate you with my anger to make me feel better for a fleeting moment. And it comes at your cost. And I mean, my Oprah always says, please be responsible for the energy that you bring into the room. And what I realized is I was just reckless with my energy because I was making everybody around pay for my past.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't fair. That was in my relationships. I remember having a kind of Jesus moment where I finally found that lesson. And my coach said to me when I finally got it, it's like, so where's that in your life showing up? And I'm like, you mean besides everywhere? Because it's like, that's literally the algorithm in my entire life. Every relationship I ever screwed up, every job I ever messed up, or every conversation went bad, that was it. And, you know, when I started to see that, I now started looking through a different view in my lens of saying, that's not, and the things, small things started to change. I want to try and get to, because we have about 15 minutes left in the show, and I want to really use this opportunity to ask you some really valuable questions, because there's a lot of people that are watching right now that would want to learn how to be an ally. I understand there's the term white privilege and white fragility and all these terminologies and catchphrases that are coming out right now. I'd like to be altruistic about the view and being open-minded to looking into my own inventory, my own personal experience, how I can change to be a better person. I realize I've done things poorly in my past, not because I've chosen, but because I was taught that way. And I've got a lot of unlearning to do. I would like to know how we as a white entitled population, how can we be more empathetic and more better allies for people of color or marginalized people that we just have never understood?
Yeah, it's a very loaded question and concept, because there's so much that needs to be done, and again, there's so many layers to racism and systemic racism that it takes an incredible amount of energy being poured in that direction in order for things to change and become an ally. So, I think some of the most obvious ways, obviously, is, again, listening to BIPOC skaters or BIPOC people, understanding understanding the experience, and on top of that, another important factor is taking time to educate yourself. Again, read on experiences of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. Read books on how to be an anti-racist. Read books on if you're triggered in a certain way. If you're listening to something and you don't understand it, or you feel triggered, try to understand why it's triggering you. And if you're not sure, try to research it. Try to engage in the concept of anti-racism, and take time to again to watch, whether it's watching documentaries or watching or reading history, the history also of Black people in America and in Canada as well. It's like we forget that in Canada there was 200 years of slavery, and people forget that. They think Canada is better than the US. They think Canada is, but in Canada we have to understand that racism is embedded in the system. It's there. And yes, we're nice Canadians, and so you don't necessarily potentially see as much hard-hitting racist acts, but they're there. And not only are they there, but sometimes, most of the time, they are done in a passive-aggressive, I'm a nice Canadian kind of way, and I think we need to understand that Canada does a really good job at playing the we're not as bad as the US card. And that is something that needs to change, because Canada has its issues. And yes, it is as bad as the US if you talk about systemic racism. My father, who's from Africa, I've seen him experience systemic racism his entire life in Canada. I've seen it with my own eyes, what it looks like on an African man. I've seen it, what it looks like on an African woman. I've seen it, what it looks like on an Arab, on a Muslim. It's present everywhere in our society. And It just takes a moment to try and understand it. If something happens in your environment and you have an awareness that allows you to see that this potentially is rooted in systemic racism or racism, do something about it. Speak on it. Engage in it. Show support, but then also show that this is not okay and that it shouldn't be this way. We shouldn't stand for that. We shouldn't allow this to happen. We shouldn't allow certain words to be said. We shouldn't allow certain actions to be taken, right? This is something that is every day. You can be racist one day, you can be anti-racist the next day. It all depends on the actions that you take in every moment. So constantly, being mindful and being aware of, how can I best sit in the chair of being an anti-racist every day? And I think that's when we'll see people really changing, and we'll see society change. And I think if there's an opportunity to engage in a conversation, even if it's within your own family, talk about, how do we get here? What are we doing that is supporting these issues, and how can we change that as a family, as a group of friends, as co-workers? This is how things will actually move, and this needs to come from a place of true, deep compassion, because in that space you will see a lot of people still being angry at you. You'll see people still calling out things that are offensive. And it's important to understand that, I don't support attacking and shaming, but if there needs to be a moment where someone, reminds you, or if you want to say puts you back in your place, those instances, are important to also sit in a space of compassion and understanding. And I think those are the ways that things will start changing. And I think if we all play a role in our society, it's like with global warming, if you every day you take one little action that helps the environment, you will eventually make a change. It takes one person. That's the thing, is like, people always say, one person can't change the world. Well, actually, yes. It does happen.
Ripple effect of that one person.
You see the ripple effect. You see one person's action, inspire someone else to take an action. And that right there can happen millions of times, right?
There's a great line that I love from my movie called Cloud Atlas. I'm not sure if you ever watched Cloud Atlas with Tom Hanks.
Mm-hmm.
But they're talking about the abolitionists in the 1800s about, you'll never put a death to racism, you'll never make a difference. You're like one tiny drop in the ocean. And the guy replies back to him, it's like, what is the ocean but a multitude of drops?
Yeah. Yes,
and
absolutely.
if you have the numbers behind that, I actually have a theory about skin in the game. And, obviously, if you're a Jewish person and you're promoting Jewish rights, or you're a gay person promoting gay rights, you're taking a stand for your own identity. You have skin in the game for that.
Mm-hmm.
Me as a white male, I have no skin in the game for a Jewish person or an indigenous person or a gay person, because I'm straight, or a person of color. If I come from the place that because I don't have skin in that game, and I still take ownership of that because it's the human experience that I'm going for with the soul as its basis, and I take a stand for that person that I don't identify with as that group, I think it's a really powerful ally. And I think that's where we need to start the shift of getting people to say, hey, listen, you don't have to be a person of color to stand up for people of color. You don't have to be a gay person to stand up for people, who are gay, or women's equality. You don't have to be a woman to do that. In fact, men will shift that because we're the inhibitors of that, matriarchal, powerful, feminine, divine work that needs to come out now. I think the allies, if we can educate people, I always use this example. I have two people of color in my life that are friends of mine. One is a shamer and one is an educator. And the shamer always comes out to me as like, oh, you're racist and you're this and that, and he just shames me, which tunes up my listening altogether. And my other really close friend is this like, Chuck, can I give you an insight on how that would look on a person of color from my experience? I'm like, well, yeah, I value your opinion. I'd love to hear that. And he shares with me his experience. And then I'm just like, thank you for sharing that for me. Thank you for taking the time to politely educate me about this, because I had no idea. I'm absolutely ignorant about that conversation. And I feel embarrassed about it, or I feel shameful about it. But can you please keep doing this to me? It's going to take me a little while to learn and understand how I do this. But then I can be the person where I can have that conversation with other white people, so that way we can now start being the multitude of drops in the Pacific Ocean. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. So one of the things that I want to share on that topic is, from my experience so far, in my commitment to making this world not only a better place, but a more diverse place, right? In my journey on my commitment to that, I wouldn't have been able to have as much impact on my environment if it wasn't for my white people standing by me and standing with me on this. And when I say that, I mean it truly, because I've had a few occasions where I was trying to get a point across. I was trying to make someone understand the importance of acknowledging an experience, the importance of prioritizing systemic racism. If I wasn't in that conversation with my good friend, who she has stood by me with me through all of this, if it wasn't for her at some point stepping up in the conversation and saying, hey, this is not okay, and we need to do this. If it wasn't for that, nothing would have happened. And that happened many times since all of this started. So I can't stress how important allyship is, and how important it is for a white person to speak, for a white person to stand by someone. Because in my opinion, and from what I've seen, one of the big reasons why we're seeing a shift right now is because white people are on board.
Yeah.
If a black person is trying to, fight for what's right for its race, usually people would be like, oh, he's just trying to do it to benefit his own race.
Yeah.
Right?
In the game.
If everyone is, if everyone were only fighting for what's, for who they are and for what matters to them, people would only see that as they're only doing it for themselves. Right? So to have, to have white people standing in this conversation and engaging in those conversations and taking the lead in certain ways, it's huge, and it's the reason why we're finally seeing certain changes happen. I can't say that this is going to be forever. I can't say that this is the path that we're on right now is actually going to change society. I can't say that, because we've seen too many times things start and then nothing really truly happens on a concrete level. But the path that we're on right now and what I'm seeing is massive. And I'm grateful for the people that were in my life, that are in my life, that stood with me throughout this time. And I think the more we can have people come together from different races, that's how that's how we can combine as a human race and tackle issues that we all think should change, right?
And I think the one word I just come back to is the word justice. Under the law, we should all have justice. So that way, I don't care who you are, if you're male, female, straight, gay, what your religion is, how tall you are, where you come from, who your father was, everybody should have justice under the law. And if that's under the law, then you're actually acknowledging the real systemic problem is that there is a hierarchy and an elitism of thinking of people who are entitled that even think that not only think they're better than you are, but they live the lifestyle like they are better than you are. And it comes from a condescending place. And that, I think, inherently is what racism is. It's just a condescending view based on a perception of skin color, money, any sort of elite status that you want to throw at that. It's a condescending view that I think is rooted in a lack of self-worth. Because if you truly have to pick on somebody else or hate somebody else, I think there's something on your side that you have an inferiority complex of why you're terrified or scared of that person or why that person threatens you. And I think inherently that's what racism is. I think inherently there's a fear there that's the underlying belly that motivates behavioral patterns.
And I think
that's what needs a shift.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think also racism is an unawareness of how your privilege is impacting others.
100%.
Yeah. And I think the people who have decided to raise awareness or at least dive within as to how is my privilege affecting others negatively.
Yes.
That's where you fight racism. That's where you can fight racism at its core. And as long as people stay unconscious, and some people choose to stay unconscious, and that's there's nothing we can do about that.
That's
but
where
the
they're
people,
at, yeah.
That's where they're at on their journey. But the people that take the time to gain consciousness on how their privilege is affecting others, I think is one of the biggest things we can see in our society that will potentially help change how things are.
That was a really big shift for me, was the word privilege, because when I had one of my first conversations with privilege, I got really defensive about that because I'm just like, privilege? What do you mean privilege? Like, I'm a 5'8", stubby, sawed-off white guy that is like, there's privilege up here, then there's 50 feet of shit, and then there's me. I don't have any privilege. You can go all the way up the hierarchy line. You can go all the way up to like Prince Harry and say he's got privilege, and he's going to say, no, my brother's the crown prince. And then you go to Prince William, and Prince William's going to say, yeah, but my father is next in line to the throne. And then Prince Charles says, well, yeah, but my mother has been the longest serving monarch in British history. What do you mean privilege? She has privilege. And then when you go to her, she says, well, I have to represent 300 million people, or how many people that are in the United Kingdom with a global empire of Commonwealth. I mean, so for me, that was just a deference of responsibility rather than really reflecting back. And again, this is where the education of my friends of color had to come back and say, I see that's how you see that. Can I offer you a different view? Yeah. And I'm like, sure, yeah, of course I'm open for that. And then the conversation was like, privilege doesn't mean that you actually are better than something else or someone's better than you. It means that you have certain advantages that other people don't have. And then I'm like, what do you mean? Everybody has privilege at that level. I spent a lot of time in the Bahamas. And in the Bahamas, there is a hierarchy of skin color. There's the white Bahamians, and then there's the light-skinned brothers, and then there's the dark-skinned brothers, and then there's 50 feet of shit, and then there's the Haitians.
Yeah.
And the Haitians, they treat them like dirt down there. They're the laborers. They're the $8 an hour people. And they're really, really picky of Haitians for whatever reason. So, I mean, it doesn't just end there. But again, for me to see that at the point, that was a massive, massive opening for me that I never saw. That unless somebody took the time and explained to me properly, well, then I was just like, well, man, oh man, I'm an asshole. Because yeah, okay, yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, I'm a privileged prick that way. Yeah, absolutely. There's certain things like I've never had to worry about, having an argument with a cop. I get pulled over by cops for tickets. It's never occurred to me that I'm able to walk at nighttime because I have a penis and nobody wants to rape me. That's a privilege. Like people were like, what do you mean you walk through the valley at nighttime? Like, why would you do that? I'm like, who's going to mess with me? Like, I'm a white, I can run really fast too, but it never occurred to me that privilege was the reason why I was walking through that valley. It was just an unconscious belief system that I thought I can do this because I've never been. Now, I got wrestled up by a couple cops in Italy, in Venice. Before that really rung true for me, I'm like, well, now justice, it's not just for me. If this is just me and I'm a privileged white guy, I can't even imagine what you deal with if you're George Floyd. And the nameless hundreds and thousands of people out there that get marginalized because of that conversation.
Yeah. Or even if you're, someone working in the field and someone else gets a promotion or someone else gets the job because they look white and you look, different. And that's the story of my father, his entire life. When the paper shows up and it says Elladj Balde, right away, that name speaks something. It speaks black, it speaks Muslim, it speaks. So, when there's
different.
That or in Quebec, a Patrick something, that's what it is. And I think finally seeing that, and I'm glad that you're seeing that, because I think it's such an important thing. People really tend to reject privilege, and I think it's something that we all have to look into, because in a way, not in a way, but within this conversation of racism, I am privileged. I have lighter skin. I see myself when I'm with my group of dudes and we're walking in somewhere. I see how people look at me and I see how people look at them, right? Obviously, when I'm walking in with a group of white people, I see the way they look at me and they look at them. That's different. But I also see the difference when I'm with my group of guys who are black. So I lived in a way a life of privilege. I lived a life of privilege because I didn't miss anything as a child. Yes, we weren't rich. We were, we didn't have everything that we wanted, but I had everything I needed. Whereas a lot of people in underserved communities who suffer a certain level of systemic oppression in their environments can't even feed their kids, right? So,
and work really hard just to feed their kids.
Just to feed their kids.
2-3 jobs and just keep their mouth shut and keep their nose to the grindstone and just, suppress their own human,
Exactly. And so to acknowledge that every single person should look at their life and think, where have I been privileged? Everyone. Because we've all had a sense of privilege over someone else in a certain way, and I think that's an important concept to understand, because it's the truth.
We're running a little bit over here. I wanted to pull up the meme before we go into, here it is. Our world is not divided by race, color, or gender, or religion. Our world is divided by wise people and fools. And fools divide themselves by race, color, gender, or religion. And I thought that was really poignant. And I thought I'd just share that tonight as well, because that was something that I thought was, when I read that, I was just like, wow.
Yeah, when you speak on a, on a deep, when you speak on a deep spiritual level, it's what it is. At the end of the day, we're all one. We're all one of the same. We're all made of the same things, whether it's me or this table, whether it's me and the next planet that's there. We're all made of the same things that are here in this universe.
Same energy.
So on that level, completely agree and completely understand. And I think what 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 people need to understand is that that's an important mindset to understand, but not to use that against someone who's experienced something and is trying to speak on their experience as a Black, Muslim, gay
Yeah.
person, right? So I think that's an important thing to keep in our minds, because I've seen a lot of people, um, play the card of, we're all one, we're all the same, we're all made of the same things, but at the end of the day, in this human experience, um, we experience different things based on what we look like or who we are in this human form, right? And I think that is important to acknowledge.
I think one of the things that really worked for me, and I'm just going to speak personally here about acknowledging, is just acknowledging and validating somebody's experience. I remember one time I was having a really hard time, and I was in the car with a friend of mine, and my biggest trigger is that my dad would always say, spit it out or get to the point. So I never felt heard, and I certainly never felt understood, which is the reason why I would speak fast and always repeat myself, and people would say, why are you saying the same thing over and over again? Because I didn't feel heard. And then when I said that to my friend, she looked at me and she just said to me, I can't imagine how hard your life would have been with that at that onset.
Yeah.
And then she could have said, oh, well, that's not true. Or like, you have been heard, and tried to fix the problem that way. And to me, the starting point for me was just like, thank you for validating my human experience. Thank you for not fixing it. Thank you for not trying to tell me how I have a better privilege or how I should be happy or what I have to be looking forward to or be grateful for. Because that's just too easy. But to connect with somebody fully is just to acknowledge their experience and how it's experiencing for them. And then from that point there, then you have a level playing field where there's trust and there's listening. And from that point there, then you've got workability and you're not defensive. You've got listening and understanding for each other. And you can just look into each other and just say, I get it, man. I get it. It must be really hard for you. Yeah.
That's
and
powerful.
I think that was a great starting point for me to actually understand that. And then to take that to race or to gender, or to sexuality, anything like that, because it's the exact same conversation. When someone says, I feel marginalized or I feel, the prejudice coming from the room, and you're just like, it's not there. Don't look at it that way. Rather than just saying, yeah, man, I get it. I get the fact that that's how you feel, and you just validate their experience. Because that's what it comes down to, is you're just invalidating that human's identity or that human experience. And that's always going to be a non-starter. I don't care what color you are. I don't care who you are. Like, at some level, you're going to run up against a wall where you're invalidating someone's experience. And that's going to be the deal breaker as well.
I couldn't agree more on that. Well said.
I want to shift over to what you're doing now, because you've got 427,000 Instagram followers, which is just insane. And if you want to catch Elladj on his Instagram, you're going to see some wonderful skating. I mean, I think you're kind of limited towards your skating now because we're in the middle of March. So your skating days
outdoors,
on the lake.
Outdoors,
Yeah, that's what I mean. But at the same time, I mean, that's where the beauty comes out, the picturesque backgrounds that you're able to skate on, the lines in the ice that you make. That you get to create. I don't know who follows you around with that camera, but I mean, I'm going to give one of these to your cameraman or camera person, because I don't know.
One of them is a man, one of them is a woman.
There you go. So I already shit all over myself with that. In that conversation, to catch it, it's good to catch that, right? But I mean, you have some wonderful content as well. It's eye candy to watch as well. So I just want to give you a couple of minutes just to talk about what you're up to, and obviously Skate Global, and take a couple of minutes to talk about where people can find you as well.
Yeah. So obviously everything is on @Elladj Balde, TikTok and Instagram. Yeah, I've been busy making videos and being the representation for Black people in figure skating. You know, just being that person that young Black kids can look at and say, I want to be like him and I want to do this. And I never had that growing up. And I remember the first time I saw a beautiful Black man skate in front of me live, it changed my life. It changed the way I viewed myself. It changed the way I viewed skating. It changed the way I approached skating. It changed the course of my career. So I know how powerful that is, and I want to continue to show that you don't have to conform. You can be authentic, you can be real, you can be true to yourself, and you can be celebrated for it, and you can be successful. And whatever success means to them, I think it's something that I want to be a part of, and I want to show that you can do. And there's no one path, you know. Yes, there's the Olympic path, but there's also this path that I'm creating for myself that has never been created before. And encourage anyone really, truly, that if there isn't a path for you in something, or you feel like there isn't a path in a career, create it. Just create it, because we're that powerful as human beings, where, you know, if we have the opportunity, we can create what we want to create. So so that's kind of what I'm doing with my videos. And of course, I'm working with the Figure Skating Diversity and Inclusion Alliance as a co-founder. We are, again, committed to increasing representation, committed to increasing accessibility to rinks, helping out the next generation of BIPOC skaters with equipment, skates, scholarships, you know, anything they need in order to be supported and in order to do what they have to do in the sport. So that's a you know, work that we're extremely excited about. You know, we have a mentorship program called Big Skater, Little Skater, and it was formed by Acacia Hill, Vanessa James, and Mai Meite, and Mariah Gerber, who worked on the project as well. So these four really powerful, beautiful women just created this program where kids get to learn from the best in the sport that look like them, you know, the best from the BIPOC community. So it's an important project that we're working on, and I'm truly excited about it. And the other part is Skate Global. You know, we do workshops and seminars, and, you know, we teach skaters. We bring a holistic approach to figure skating. We dive into artistry. We dive into mental health. We dive into, you know, how to be in this environment, you know. And I think that is one of the most powerful things we can do, because, you know, you get to learn how to find fulfillment differently. You get to learn how to find fulfillment in a way that you can control it, and you can deeply resonate and connect with what you're getting fulfilled by. So that's something that we're extremely passionate about, and we're continuing to grow. And yeah, so you can catch me at a rink, because obviously all the outdoor skating is pretty much done by now. So I'll be skating indoors and making more videos, and just playing and having fun.
Well, I have one little thing I wanted to share before we go. I remember last year I was sitting on the sidelines, and you were, it was, you know, at the Battle of the Blade set, and I was talking to Ron, and Ron McLean, and you know, the smile on his face when, you know, during the commercial breaks and whatnot, that he would come by and just like watch you skate and just say, God, he's just so much fun to watch. And I mean, I love Ron. I've known him obviously for, you know, 10, 12 years. But just the vibrancy that he saw in that as well. The second thing I thought I'd just acknowledge as well is, you know, Sandra Bezic works tirelessly on that show as a visionary to bring that to fruition. I love the fact that she paired Vanessa and Akeem this year together as the first Black couple.
They were
figure
incredible.
Skating. They were incredible. That final show, they skated the perfect routine. My heart still aches because of the results of where that went with the fan voting as well. But they can control what they can control, and they absolutely killed it. And right after that, I emailed both of them and just said, "Hey, listen, you know, amazing." But just like you said, there's people out there of color that are watching that program, that's the progressive side of the shift, that they actually get to be Elladj Balde at 8 years old and see themselves represented. And now they can actually go to the rink and pick up a pair of skates and start channeling that energy constructively through the arts and have a mentor that they can meet along the way, like you had yourself, and begin that shift as well. So I thought that was just something that I wanted to, and obviously you being a judge on Battle of the Blades, just give us a quick little synopsis of your experience on that as well.
That was cool. That was honestly one of the coolest experiences I've had in my career. It's a different type of performance. It's really it's a fine line between being prepared but being present and observing what is happening, right? And reacting to what is happening. It's a fine balance, because being too prepared, you lose the being present in a moment. But if you're just present, you know, it because it's live TV, it becomes it can be very, very tricky. So so it was an incredible experience for me to learn you know, this new craft, and I loved it. I was so, by night 7 I was just like, let's go, I'm in my element, let's do this. I was feeling so good. So obviously I would love to be part of it again, if it comes around, and if they want me as a judge, I would love to be there. And one thing I wanted to add is, you know, representation. You know, for me, I'm not saying that representation would have changed my career or I'd have had better results, and maybe, but what it would have done for me, it would allow me to understand who I am and accept who I was as a human being and as a figure skater much sooner in my life, you know. And I'm glad I experienced what I experienced, because I am now who I am today, you know. But I'm thinking for young skaters who see representation, you know, it can motivate them to stay true to who they are. And that's huge.
Yeah, you mentioned your mentor as well. Do you want to just give her another shout out as well that you mentioned earlier on? I forgot her name.
Yeah, Gail Mitchell. She's from New York. She's just she changed my life. She changed my life. So there's a few people that changed my life, and obviously my fiance Michelle Dolly is one of them. But Gail Mitchell really, truly, she opened me up to a whole new world, and changed my life. And I couldn't be more grateful for her to have come into my life. And she does mentoring work. And honestly, I would recommend anyone to you know, to check her out. And if they want to have a conversation with her, I think I highly recommend it, because yeah, again, she changed my life. So
I think there's special people out there that are our guardian angels that go by the word of teachers, and they're just such a thing. Like I can't wait to live in a world where not NBA or NHL or Major League Baseball players are the heroes. It's the teachers that are the heroes, because we've all had that one teacher in our life, whether it be grade school, high school, college, professor, mentor, that literally saw the greatness inside of us before we could see it in ourselves. And that recognition was massively huge in bridging over to where you take over into who you get to step into. And, you know, for the work that she has done as well, to clear for you to come into her life, you know, it's ripple effect in someone before her that stepped into their life. You know, the growth just keeps getting rippled, and I'm a culmination of a dozen people that I name off the top of my head that would take responsibility for me being an angry white kid that never made the NHL, to, you know, having conversations where we're connecting human beings together and stepping into their greatness and their power by shedding layers of the onion of what we're not and getting out of our own way. And I've been delighted to have you as my guest tonight, Elladj.
Wow.
Thank you very much for showing up tonight.
Thank you for having me, and it's truly a pleasure. And we'll chat again. We'll chat soon.
Yeah, you know what? This went way longer than we usually have, and there's still 1,000 other things I could have asked you, and I could have gone down as well. But I think this is a really good progressive start, and I'm really looking forward to having you back on the show, obviously down the road. And please check out Elladj on Instagram. And there's Carrie there, our wonderful producer, smiling like he's just the canary.
Hey, I got to say, what an amazing interview you guys just gave us. We touched a lot of people. John Cavers saying one of the best interviews he's heard. And Elladj, you are absolutely amazing, showing your vulnerability and being able to articulate what you've lived through, what your parents lived through. And it's certainly opened our eyes. So thank you. And I was mentioning, Chuck, I got to get you on our sports show and talk about those flips, because I want to.
I'm going to do one right now.
Hang on, let's see if I can lift this button. No, I better not. So Chuck, if you can organize getting Elladj on the
of course
for us, that would be amazing, because you've inspired me. I've never been a figure skater, but I want to do a flip, and I want you to teach me how to do that before
Done.
So thank you.
Done deal.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Elladj. We'll see you soon.
Sounds good.
Chuck, that was absolutely. I could listen to you guys.
I love that guy. Honestly, that guy there, he puts a smile on my face. Every conversation I've ever had with him, he's just gratitude walking in a pair of figure skates, on the ice. And I mean, here's the one thing about Battle of the Blades. I mean, the energy on the set of Battle of the Blades is electric. I mean, everybody's skating for a charity. It's always something bigger than themselves. And Elladj was there as a choreographer in 2019-2020 season. And what he brought in between, takes for the live audience and being able to do his skates as well, he brings the stands to their feet every single time. So no matter where he goes, and again, you see this guy walk the walk of integrity, of authenticity, of compassion, of empathy, of peace. He's just, I think we could all learn a lot from Elladj Balde. I'm just really overjoyed that I got a chance to meet him.
Well, it was amazing. Thank you. And I've just got a note from Aaron Kuzak. Oh no, Gooch, going to do a flip, call 911.
Yeah, that's a lawsuit somewhere.
Lost in translation. All right, Kip, good job. Well done.
Yeah, be safe out there, everyone. And if you have any comments or questions, drop them in the box and we'll try and get back to them as soon as possible. I'd be interested to know your take on what Elladj had talked about tonight. Very excited about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chuck Bastie, Connected, a mental health initiative. You've been watching Mental Health Mondays.